Patience, years of patience, once the mosque building had finally begun.
We had money gathered up, but the money would run out, and he'd stop building, and my mother and 4 or 5, 6 men, they'd get in the car, and they'd go to Saskatchewan, and they'd go to every farm, every Arab, with Christian and Muslim, whatever they were, and gather money, come back and say, okay, start building again, here's the money.
The mosque would open its doors in 1938. It was the first mosque ever built in Canada.
We all of a sudden realized that we were Muslims, because at that point in time, we began to attend a religious center, which we'd never seen in our lives before.
That mosque was a great comfort to Ali Hamdan, because while his wife and children now lived in Edmonton, he still had a business to run in Fort Chipewyan.
Because Dad used to come home on July the 1st and leave the end of August, and we wouldn't see him for 10 months. My mother is the one that really raised us. She'd go out and buy houses, and she'd sell the house, and we'd move, and she could hardly speak the language, but she knew what to do.
Ali Hamdan's business success in the North shielded his family from the worst of the Depression. It would take a world war to rescue Alberta's economy.
Well, of course, that war turned everything around, you know, and great cost to humanity, but it definitely changed everything. And of course, the U.S. Army came through here, and just boomed.
During World War II, Allied troops transformed Edmonton into a training center for pilots and headquarters for the biggest wartime project in the country.
Alaska stands as a bowl.
The Alaska Highway.
And so, men and modern machinery combine to mold and pound out the endless miles of roadway.
American troops built the Alaska Highway to protect Alaska from the threat of a Japanese invasion.
That is still recognized, that Alaska Highway, as the greatest feat of engineering in North America. They built that highway, about 1,500 miles, in 6 months, in the mountains.
The highway brought jobs and money and people to Edmonton. The city's population grew by 25% during the war years. Among the newcomers was a Lebanese family from Endiang, Alberta. Like the Hamdans, Salim Shaban and his son Albert had prospered, but they too felt a powerful need to nourish their Muslim roots. The mosque Hilwi Hamdan had helped to create was an irresistible magnet. It would shape the destiny of the Shaban family too. This is the new Al-Rashid Mosque in Edmonton, a spiritual oasis for many of the city's more than 35,000 Muslims. Larry Shaban comes here often to pray, to visit, and to provide counsel for his community. He's particularly well qualified for that. Larry Shaban was the first Muslim elected to the Alberta legislature. He was a cabinet minister for a dozen years in the Lougheed government. His Muslim roots in Alberta are deep, stretching back more than a century to a pioneering grandfather named Salim. Like Ali Hamdan, Salim Shaban came to Alberta to become a peddler, a kind of farm-to-farm salesman.
And this is where you would buy or discounted goods from wherever you could and pack as much as you could carry and walk farm to farm and sell. And so he did that, and he was pretty good at it because he was a big man. He was, for that era, he was well over 6 feet and over 200 pounds. So he was a big guy and had a really good disposition.
Just before the First World War, Salim Shaban walked into Endiang, Alberta, and set up shop. Endiang is a farm community in south-central Alberta. It's where Larry Shaban grew up. where his grandfather's general store was often filled with customers who called Salim Shaban with some affection, Big Sam. By the early 20s, Big Sam had enough money to bring his wife and son from Lebanon. The boy, known as Albert, would become an astute business partner and later a leader in his community. But he got off to a rough start, according to his daughter Faye.
He came very young and was made fun of at school because he was 13 and they put him in grade 1 and the kids made fun of him. So he spent 1 year in school, going from grade 1 to grade 6, being tormented and teased because and he spent the rest of his life educating himself. My dad was brilliant. I think that's why he was driven, is because he really wanted to learn. By the time he was 13, he could read and write the Quran in Arabic perfectly.
Albert Shaban learned his politics from the turmoil of the 1920s. After the First World War, grain prices collapsed. The rain stopped. The soil blew away. Farmers were forced from their land. When their government seemed to have no answers, farmers demanded a stronger voice. They got it when a cooperative movement known as the United Farmers of Alberta got into politics. They won government with their first campaign tossing out the Liberals. The UFA believed in grassroots government. They fought for control of provincial resources. They tried to give farm families the same health care and education available in larger centers. That was important to Albert Shaban, who was about to start a family in his rural community. In 1930, he married Lila Kazil, a Muslim farm girl from Saskatchewan. They raised 5 children, the only Muslim family in Indiang.
All of us, as kids, had nicknames like Camel Jockey or Brown Bomber, but it didn't seem to affect us in terms of how we grew up.
It was a wonderful community. There was a real mix of people. There were Germans and there were English and there were all sorts of people. And Dad and Mom just became a part of the community and worked with the community to do whatever had to be done.
And even through the Great Depression, Albert Shaban's general store prospered.
He changed the name, expanded it, coped through the very difficult years of the Depression when goods were hard to find. He bought another store in Bymore, which was 7 miles away.
In fact, the Shabans were the first family in Indiang with electricity. Still, the Depression was ravaging most of Alberta. The 30s had brought a new round of disasters. Drought, heat, dust storms, 3 straight years of crop failure. What they could harvest earned them half what it used to. And at the same time, factory workers were laid off as industrial production dropped by 50%. Alberta was all but bankrupt. Kept afloat with handouts from a federal government many Albertans had come to despise.
1 Thessalonians chapter 4, verses 16-17. The Lord himself shall descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel.
It was fertile ground for Bible Bill Eberhart. He was an evangelical preacher. His radio broadcasts turned him into a politician.
Then you should vote for social credit candidates in your constituency. But if you want the present system of relief and dole and the necessary appendage of the work of wages program, and if you want your government to go on borrowing and thus placing your country into debt with its inevitable interest charges and disastrous taxes, vote for any of the old line parties.
Eberhart believed the banks were to blame for the lingering depression, and he knew just how to fix things. Eberhart preached the gospel of social credits, promising $25 a month for every Albertan. He was convinced the money would encourage spending, revive the economy, and end the Depression. It was just what poor Albertans wanted to hear. In the provincial election of 1935, not a single member of the United Farmers of Alberta government would be returned. Alberta would elect social credit governments for the next 35 years.
But let it be declared that the Lord Jesus Christ, the King of Kings
And one of the biggest supporters for the Christian Evangelical Party was Albert Shaban, a Muslim.
Many of the aspects of social credit parallel the teachings of Islam. And one of those being that profit is permitted, but interest is forbidden or frowned upon. And of course, the social creditors railed against the charging of interest.
People on the platform today, what do you say? We mean business.
The importance of decision-making by consensus, the idea of consultation. These are things that were taught in our faith, and they were tenets that were subscribed to by social credit in those early days.
Albert could see elements of his faith in his new land, but there was still no place to practice that faith. That was about to change. In the mid-30s, a small group of visitors, including Hilwy Hamden, came to Endiang. They were raising money to build a mosque in Edmonton. It would prove an irresistible attraction for the Shaben family.
The family moved because of our faith, to attend a mosque, to be able to live and be involved with other Muslims. And also, for my dad, an important consideration was business opportunities.
Larry Shaben was 10 when his family arrived in Edmonton. The year was 1945, and Edmonton was a bustling place. The Second World War had just ended. A new era of prosperity was about to begin. For the Shaben family, the brightest moments would happen during Muslim holy days at the Al-Rashid Mosque.
The mosque would be jammed and the yard would be jammed because that's when everyone came. And the kids got gifts from the older folks. They'd give you a nickel or a dime, and we'd get a day off from school.
I can remember saying to Dad, it was the nicest feeling in the world to go into that building, and all our activities were downstairs, and to think of all those people as being my family.
In fact, some of those people would soon become family.
And this is in the mosque, in the beautiful little mosque.
When we come back, a marriage in the mosque.
"52 years ago, my father walked me down the aisle, and then I stood there with my bridesmaids, and the men knelt on the carpet. We had a traditional, almost traditional Lebanese ceremony. In that case, the groom married my father while I stood and watched.
I would kneel down here and face my father-in-law, and we'd clasp our hands, and they'd put a cloth over our hands. And we'd say the vows, and when it was all finished, I was married. I hadn't even held my wife's hand yet.
There they are, the bridal party on the stairs of the mosque.
At the midpoint of Alberta's century, Faye Shaben married Sid Hamden.
He was a handsome devil, and you might want to edit that out, but he was a real rake, if you want to know. He had a girlfriend. He was a traveling salesman, and he had a girlfriend in every town in the country. So for him to settle down and marry this little Lebanese girl was really something.
The families had been friends for years. Now they were relatives. They were also business partners in a thriving toy wholesale company Albert Shaben had set up soon after moving to Edmonton.
We were the largest toy wholesaler in Canada. People were very proud that 4 Lebanese boys could build something this big.
He was so proud. And my dad, Albert Shaben.
Albert Shaben came to Alberta with little education and no English. 30 years later, he was a successful businessman who believed in giving back to his community.
When we moved to Edmonton, there was a constant stream of people coming to his door at his store or at the wholesale, where he would help them fill out their income tax forms. He would help them with applications to bring immigrant members of their family over. And sometimes his partners would complain that he took too much time doing community work.
Alberta had changed dramatically in the years since Albert Shaben arrived, thanks in large part to oil.
The spectacular flares burn off the first flow of oil, which is contaminated with mud and other impurities.
When Imperial No. 1 at Leduc burst into life, Alberta was transformed, finally, from a province of poverty to one of plenty.
And a network of pipelines brings in the oil from several nearby producers.
The Leduc well paid 15 cents a barrel in royalties into the provincial treasury, and it was just the first of many.
Overnight, the roads were filled with traffic, oil workers, and trucks carrying pipe.
Drilling crews from across the continent rushed in. A province that had been essentially bankrupt was debt-free within a year. By 1951, Alberta's population surpassed that of Saskatchewan forever. The population growth was reflected in the crowds at Edmonton's mosque, and you didn't have to be Muslim to be welcome.
And for many years, the Christian Lebanese community participated in our dances and our social events. It was wonderful. We used to go to all of the Greek functions, and the Greeks came to ours, and we felt very connected to them. Our dances were similar, and we look alike. And so we used to go to dance at all their parties, and they'd come and dance at ours, and we'd go to their teas and bake sales, and they'd come to ours.
But when they got together, they also talked and worried about the crisis in the Middle East. In 1948, the State of Israel was created. Suddenly, Palestinians became refugees. And Albert Shaben turned into a political activist.
He became involved in debating the idea that it was unfair to the residents of Palestine that were being displaced as a result of the partition. So he spoke up in opposition and was invited to speak in communities throughout Western Canada. He had a huge impact on my choice of a political career because we would discuss political issues. We would compare our thoughts about the work of Abraham Lincoln or other leaders that both of us admired.
In 1960, Larry Shaben's political passions were set aside temporarily. He got married to Alma Amina. For the first few years, the young couple was preoccupied with raising a family.
We didn't have very much. We had these 5 children, and we needed to make a living. He was running a bowling alley at the time, and it wasn't working, selling a bit of real estate. So we grabbed the bull by the horn, and we moved up north.
North, 350 kilometers, to the small town of High Prairie.
In retrospect, it was a huge risk. We had signed a deal to buy a business, and we didn't have the financing to do it. And we moved to a rented house and proceeded to go from bank to bank. There were 3 banks in High Prairie at the time, to see if we could get the necessary financing to complete the deal.
But within a year of arriving in High Prairie, Larry Shaben was head of the Chamber of Commerce. He was elected to town council, and the family settled right in, according to their youngest child, Joan.
My best memory of High Prairie is actually our house, our backyard. Mom and Dad were smart enough, because a lot of kids, we had a double lot on the corner between the high school, the junior high school, 1 block away from the high school, junior high school, elementary school. And so it became the gathering place. It was the place where everybody came by.
Hello. Hello. Peter Waheed. What's the name, sir? Ted Ewing.
Larry Shaben's political career was about to take off, thanks to another sea change in Alberta politics. This one led by Peter Lougheed.
Hello. Good morning. How are you? Got the kids working, eh? Yeah, that's nice.
Lougheed was the embodiment of a youthful, energetic Alberta.
What's the name?
His conservatives were vigorous and trendy, everything the social credit was not. Just as Bible Bill Aberhart had been the voice of Alberta politics, Peter Lougheed became the face.
You say less than...
He used television the way Eberhard had used radio to convince Albertans it was time for a change.
My mother's just leaving that regular. Mr. Lougheed, who's going to be our new provincial premier. Maybe not this time, but next time.
In 1971, Lougheed's Conservatives replaced the Socred dynasty with one of their own.
He was wise. He recognized that the face of Alberta was changing through immigration and through our multicultural nature of our province. And in order to be an inclusive government, you needed to include people.
Larry Shaben was sworn in as a member of the Alberta legislature for the Lougheed government's second term.
That was really a proud moment because it was a moment where my family was there and where all of the new members were sworn in. And of course mine was different because I swore on a Quran where everyone else had sworn on a Bible. I have the good fortune of being the first Muslim MLA in Alberta and the first Muslim cabinet minister in Canada. So it was particularly important I think, for other Muslims in Canada to know that we are part of the mainstream. We're part of the community. We're contributors.
In his 15 years in government, Larry Shaben would run the Ministry of Utilities, the Ministry of Economic Development, and the Ministry of Housing, but he saw precious little of his own home.
Our youngest, Joan, was 8 years old and Linda was 13 when he was elected, so he was away from home a lot for 15 years. So when he did come home on weekends, the community needed him. I'd send him out to mow the lawn and I'd think, good, it's getting done, and then all of a sudden there was silence and he'd look out, the lawnmower was there, but Larry was gone. Somebody'd come by and picked him up.
Larry Shaben developed a reputation for getting things done quietly. He was rarely in the headlines, until the awful story he shared with Grant Notley.
After 11 years of wasteful projects...
Notley was one of a kind as well, the first New Democrat in the Alberta legislature. Notley was also Larry Shaben's political neighbor, representing the riding to the west of Lesser Slave Lake. Both men did plenty of traveling, often by plane, seldom on the same plane. One exception was the night of October 19th, 1984.
That particular night, it was really iffy because the ceiling was low, it was soupy, and there was a lot of moisture. And normally I'd sit in the right-hand seat because they flew without a co-pilot, and I would visit with the pilot who sat in the left-hand seat. But this particular night, I didn't feel like talking, so I took the seat behind the pilot. Strange thing, which I never did. And the plane began to descend, and so I looked over the pilot's shoulder to see what the altimeter read. And it was just shortly after that that we crashed. And the sound was just deafening. And 6 people were killed, 4 instantly. And one of the people that was killed had chosen the seat that I didn't take. That was Grant Notley.
Grant Notley was 45. His death shook Alberta politics. And the memory would never dim for a battered Larry Shaben, who stayed in politics just one more term. It's the story of Alberta, carved in Arabic. This is Edmonton's Beechmount Cemetery.
Okay.
Many of Alberta's Muslim pioneers are laid to rest here. uncles and aunts, grandfathers and grandmothers. In Arabic, jiddis and sittis.
Here we are. Do you want to put it in between the two of them? Should we?
Karen and Evelyn Hamden are granddaughters of Hilwi and Ali Hamden. They visit often to give honor and to get inspiration.
I mean, you think about it. Jiddi went from this young boy who used to get on a donkey in the Bekaa Valley and ride down into Palestine to get olive oil and olives, and then ride back up to living in Fort Chip. You know, with this wonderful community of First Nations, Indigenous people, and riding a dog team.
Really?
Wow. Talk about a quantum leap. In the name of Bism Allah, Al-Rahman Ar-Rahim, in the name of God, most gracious, most merciful.
They're my roots. I mean, they're the roots that allow me to be who I am. I mean, that solid sense of being grounded in their wisdom and their guidance.
Much of that guidance was imparted at the mosque.
And there's my dad. That's down in the basement of the mosque, when the mosque was in the very right where Vic High is now.
Faye Hamden shares memories with two grandchildren.
Oh, look at that old car. There's your great-grandfather, great Jiddi Ali.
The mosque is a consistent thread in her stories. It was a beacon of faith for half a century.
I learned to dance in the basement of the mosque. My dad was the best dancer.
Oh, and you're 8.
Yeah.
Edmonton's Muslim population, once a handful, is now more than 35,000.
Come and get the horse escaped.
Far too many for a tiny brick mosque. So in 1982, the mosque their parents and grandparents worked so hard to create was abandoned.
Mo, Karen, honey, please.
Evelyn Hamden, among others, wasn't ready to let it go.
It seemed inconceivable that this little mosque, which was much more than just a structure, it was the symbol of a community's capacity to come to a new country, would just literally crumble to the ground. All of their hard work would just be, in a generation, forgotten. That just seemed wrong.
Evelyn Hamden joined a group of Muslim women who vowed to preserve the old mosque.
It was a tremendously challenging task. I mean, financially challenging, politically challenging, logistically challenging. I always felt like at every step of the way, it was just a step away from not happening.
The first challenge, just like the first time, was money. Edmonton's Muslim community was just beginning to pay the bills for a far larger mosque, and many of the new worshippers had little connection to the original. The political challenge arose when they tried to move the original mosque to Fort Edmonton Park.
Seemed like a fitting place to put it in a historical park that commemorates sort of the great buildings of this city.
Still, there was a problem, because the park was set up to tell the stories of Edmonton up until the 1920s.
You're allowed holes for the eyes to use, the natural holes, but anything else...
There's an 1895 street, a 1905 street, but no place, some argued, for a mosque opened in 1938. In the end, Edmonton City Council overruled the park's historical foundation. Almost 10 years after being abandoned, the mosque was installed and renovated in Fort Edmonton Park. A new generation of Muslims had their first big success making a difference.
So this was one of our projects, Deb, that we're supporting. It's PARD, Popular Aid for Relief and Development. And
Joan Shaban is trying to make a difference in the refugee camps in Lebanon. She works with an aid group called Human Serve International.
I remember when your mother and I were there, And there was electrical wires hung every which way. You'd swear that people would get electrocuted. It ran from building to building and crisscrosses.
It still is. They steal electricity from everywhere in the camps. It's amazing that anything works in that country. I think that you have this ideal of this place where it is the land of olives and you pick fruit off the trees, which you do. You absolutely do. You go. I walked to my mom's village. We took the bus into the Baka into her village, and we were picking cherries off the trees. And this is in May. We were picking apricots, and we were looking at olive trees. But next to it is not in the village, but in the city of Beirut and just south of that, and in the camps. It's just desperation. People scraping by.
HumanServe was created by a group of young Muslim women in Edmonton. Another generation continuing the family traditions of public service.
I'm really gratified by it. It just seems natural for them. Part of their lives is giving.
On a sunny Alberta morning, the circle becomes complete.
And that I will faithfully observe the laws of Canada.
A citizenship ceremony on the Alberta Legislature grounds.
As a Canadian citizen. Félicitations, congratulations, you're Canadian.
Larry Shaban, former cabinet minister, first Muslim elected to the Alberta government, is a guest of honor.
I was looking at the people in the front rows and the smiles on their faces throughout that whole ceremony. There was great joy. As you were being sworn in, I couldn't help but think about my grandfather, who left Lebanon 102 years ago to make a new life for himself. That's why I'm here. And in many ways, it really hasn't changed. We
have to remind ourselves every day how fortunate we are. That I was fortunate enough to be born into a family where my dad's grandfather decided that he needed to move to Canada. Where our biggest worry is what we want, not what we need.
This morning begins the end of one journey and the start of a new one in Canada.
It's a story of strength. It's a story of faith. It's a story of toughness. It's a story of perseverance. It's a story of love. It's a story of giving.
I'm very happy for you. Thank you. I'm happy for you.
Good.
I think it's just something we heard all our lives growing up, that we're part of a community. And it's not about sort of blind obligation to your community, but it's about ensuring that as a human being, you live in a way that makes your community a better place to live for everybody, not just for you.
Okay, thank you.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
That was the lesson we learned from Siti and Jiddi, and we know they're watching. We're trying to do our best.
Congratulations. Congratulations.
Come on over to the house.
Seriously? What's that move? I won. No, you're not.
I think you make